Hey, thank you. I'd like to say that it's an honour to be here tonight in a room that I first encountered in 1977, and I've seen and learnt so much in this room that it's a real privilege to be up on this side of the action, and kind of intimidating as well. I'm going to go straight in because there's a lot of images, more than I realised. So I'm going to have to be pretty quick. If you want me to stop, just yell and I'll stop. This is the area that I grew up in. It's the Thames, the industrial Thames, just east of London. And the Thames River, I learned to swim in the Thames when it was completely polluted. I did get dysentery with my brother. We both got it, but it holds a very special place in my heart. It provided, a focus. My father was a longshoreman, ship worker. Mum did school dinners. My brother went in the docks. He's a little older than me. He went in as a carpenter apprentice. And I went in at the age of 15 and 2 months to begin an apprenticeship as a boilermaker, plater, steel worker, and welder. So this image, you can see that it was an industrial, dirty area. There were a lot of cement factories around this area. And but it's I still go there every time I'm back home. I still wander the banks of the Thames. So, and then there were the guys I worked with in the dock, who were interesting people. They all had a story. Some a bit tragic, some a little happier, but wonderful people. And these are people who would have grown up with my dad in Tilbury. And then there's the visual thing of the dry dock in this case, and it was so rich in the visual stuff. It was difficult. I didn't know what to do with it, but I kept looking at it, and I eventually got myself a Pentax. One of the Boilermakers bought it back from Hong Kong for me, and I started taking these pictures. And at the age of 17, I was in the shop, in the plater's shop, and the welders, everybody had gone to lunch, and the welders had been welding, and there were strings of smoke going up to the big Victorian skylights high up in the ceiling. And I was in there, and I just thought to myself, this isn't for the rest of your life. There's got to be more to life than just working for money for a boss. And that was the beginning of a change. I started taking things more seriously. I started getting awards at the day release apprentices school. And the camera was part of that. I thought maybe that's what I'd become, a photographer or something. I didn't know. So anyway, and then it jumps to when I was at St Martin's. And I got into St Martin's as a special student with no qualifications at the age of 24. So I'd finished my apprenticeship. I'd gone off and worked in the bars and nightclubs in the Spanish tourist areas, and I came back. But when I was unemployed, I started painting because a lot of my friends were art students. I was a very serious mod in my very early years, and that got me a local reputation, and so I befriended a lot of art students, and so I had a kind of rough idea of stuff. I really didn't know very much about art at all, but in the first year in St Martin's, it was an absolute revelation, and I began to, the teachers were so good, and they just opened the doors, and I just took to making sculpture because of my experience in steelwork, but it was a new way of seeing, and I just was completely enthusiastic and insane about it. And so I made these pieces. These are all steel. the thing was that my visual world was very much to do with industry. The ideas that germinated these sculptures, the beginnings of these sculptures, were all linked to the visual experience that I developed in industry. And that's also, this is inch thick, inch and a quarter thick steel, some of this. That's for ships. That's the stuff I nicked in the back of my car and took to my studio, and it was wonderful because you couldn't do that. You couldn't without real heavy equipment. And I made those trestles when I was about 18, and I've still got them. They're in my studio now. But this was the sculpture trying to find its way. It became that, which was in a way more related to that first grey sculpture. That's the front view. So viewpoints were very important. And you don't see any welds in this viewpoint. It's all just lapping over. All the welds are hidden underneath, which seemed very important to me. That's another one with the end view of it. And then I came to New York City on a scholarship at the New York Studio School. And that was me trying to establish myself here using the language I'd built up from my experiences in St. Martin's, the end view of it. That's just outside, the back of the building here. Anyway, at that point I began to have a bit of a think. It was, sorry about that. It's a bit of a worn out joke, but I can't resist it. But I was in reflection. I was, I didn't have money, so to speak. I was working for $5 an hour painting apartments and what have you. I thought a scholarship meant you got the money. I didn't realise the school got the money and you got to go there. I was used to the English system. And I began to question what right I had to make these big kind of industrial type sculptures. You know, what kind of ego was behind that, and should I do that? And I'm mixing with the students at this school who were very different to the students I'd developed with in St. Martin's. These people were looking at old painting. We never did that at St. Martin's at all, old art. My wife Stephanie was here. We met here, and she was one of the people who got me to look at paintings, and I discovered paintings really for the first time in the Frick and then the Met on one or two particular days. And it really opened my eyes, and with the touchstone of David Smith as well, although I wasn't really thinking about him at the time, this was the result. The sculpture became very frontal, a lot more to do with drawing and trying to think about composition in a way the others didn't. And I was very excited by the negative spaces. I tried to make the negative more powerful than the solid material. And I thought that was a pretty hot thing until I discovered that Gonzalez had said that many, many years before. But anyway, it was good. It was good for me, and it led to a series. This piece is 11 feet long by about 8 feet tall. That one's 13 feet tall. They were getting very complex. But I was still making quite big sculptures, and by this time I was going to the museums, the Metropolitan in particular, as much as I could, and I got looking at these little guys and really enjoying the rhythms and things going on in them. And that helped me to begin to make smaller sculpture. This one is probably about 18 inches tall. And it was very liberating. This one I made in England, and that's a handrail from a ship. I took it out of the blacksmith shop because the industry had closed and the shops were open, so I used to drive into the docks and go and scavenge what I could. And this was made from a memory of one of my first pieces of New Guinea art that I bought in New York. It's called Korogo, after the village that the mask was from. So that's the first time I've done anything like that. Now, around the first year in the studio school, Mercedes Matter asked me for a drawing for a show that they were having in the school. And there were lots of really exciting people in the show. She didn't know I hadn't done any drawing really. At St Martin's we didn't do any drawing. So I kind of thought I'd better get something done. So I kept drawing, but the stuff I didn't like I started cutting out with a Stanley knife. And then I'd stick it down to more white paper and then cut into that. So in a way I was actually collaging in the way that I was making my sculptures, in a constructivist way. And in the end it ended up with this very lacy image which I just stuck to some brown paper that happened to be in the studio. And I wish I'd have made more. I never did, but Mercedes loved it. That was really important because I was terrified. And so then sculptures began to develop, and I was interested in pulling in that scoop of space. And this wave format is something that kept coming back to me. I began to realise you sometimes repeat forms in different ways. This one I was trying to use as little material as possible and still make that powerful negative. It's about 6 feet tall. And then some drawings began to occur, and I've put more drawings in this talk than I've ever done before. So I was getting quite excited by it, and they did seem to relate to the sculptures I was making, which quite excited me as well. And they're experimenting. And then there's that arc shape again. This is in the very early 80s. That one is still a favourite of mine. I love that piece. It's very rusty now. We'll get to that later. And then they became quite small, and I got curious about the possibility of casting from them. So this one was cast in Manchester for me by a friend. This one's probably about 4 inches tall, and it lent itself quite well to being cast. Part of the reason was in the steel one, the previous one, every now and again a little pinhole of light would shine through, and it would disrupt the sense of density that I was trying to develop in them. So by casting I lost that. These are solid as well, they're not hollow, they're just solid lumps of bronze, which was quite exciting. And then that form again, that arc form, and I used a shell at the top there. That's a big bullet, as it were. And then there's a sculpture called King. I began bringing in chain quite a lot. This one ended up at Storm King, that's where it is there. And it's kind of ironic that King ended up at Storm King. And so I'm showing a few pieces over a period of time that were outdoor works. So these are kind of echoing those open steel drawing type sculptures. And then this one, Time, is in Newport News in East Virginia. That's about 16 feet tall. It's an ellipse, it's not a circle. And then some drawings were popping up en route. The drawings were like excursions. I'd go in and work maybe a few weeks on drawings, and then it would just come to an end, or maybe 6 months, but it would always end, and then there'd be a year or two without any drawing at all. But that's changed now. So again, trying to use as few pieces as possible to make something that really speaks. And then I got interested in making a series which became helmets. They're more dense I was quite interested in that. And they were named after the gods or planets. This is Saturn. And later, I was artist in residence in Greensboro, and to work in the sculpture studio, you had to clear up every night your work and put it away because other people were coming in. And I just couldn't work like that. I couldn't pick up all my material, put it away in a cupboard and get it out in the morning. You know, I'd been used to having a large studio in Greenpoint. So I couldn't make sculpture, but I was there for a semester, and they gave me another studio as well, which was in the languages division, so I couldn't make any noise. It was kind of peculiar. But I did have a few sculptures with me, not this one. And I put it, and the light by the window caught the sculpture, and I thought, I want to try to draw that, and I did. And so that became the beginning of a series that I called the Greensboro Reflection Series. And this was of that, the memory of that helmet. I was interested in drawing them from memory. There's another helmet, that one's Mars. And then this is Ironheart. It's quite small. It's only probably 9 inches. But what I really like about this one, and one of the reasons I kept the slide in, is you really see the fluidity of steel and how the forms of the solid parts are emerging from the fluidity as well in the middle there. And that's something I've been fascinated by for a long time now. So they're getting pretty complex here. And that part of my thinking was, if I'm making still sculpture, can that sculpture itself be an armature for a casting that's pretty direct? So you just work the surface with wax, and then I cast this one, which is that previous piece, just a different view of it, into plaster and painted it to look like bronze. I was never quite sure if I liked it, although I like it more now than I think I ever have. So that's a good sign. Then I made this one in London. It was after I saw the tribal art show, coupled with you know, how the effect of African and tribal art on the artists at the turn of the century and forward. And this was a vague memory of I think it was a Polynesian sculpture, where the kind of the offspring were oozing out of the body. It was kind of a remarkable thing. I think Max Ernst owned it at one time or something like that. But so anyway, so this became Progeny, and it's made with a lot of really heavy steel from the British Steel Corporation that my friend let me use. And it's real chunker, and I was absolutely thrilled by it for quite a long time. I still am, but that's going rusty too. And so that's kind of a memory of that piece when I was in Greensboro, and the memory of that piece. I must confess that the memory was also from looking at the slides when I was giving lectures, so the memory was pretty fresh, because I gave 3 lectures there. So that was informing the work. And I got very into the chain, and welding the chain in place seemed very much like, and this is to do with being at the studio school, where there's a lot of modelling, it seemed like the movement of the fingertip. It was like modelling, and there was a limited amount of moves, because every time you welded the chain link in place, you could only move the next link in a certain amount of configurations. And that was really interesting, because it was really working with your fingertips rather than your hands or your arms or your whole body wrestling a sculpture into place. And that was quite interesting for me. And this one is called Firstborn, and Jock was over there. So it's one of the cruelest sculptures he's ever seen. and I've never been able to work it out, but I think I understand it. When I did that form in it there with the ball inside, I was thinking of Un Chemin Andalou, where the razor blade passes over the eyeball in that film and a cloud goes through the moon. I was thinking of that, so maybe Jock was right. Anyway, on the lighter side, I was going to Portugal to my friend's place, and these things, I got very into the clay jars, the storage jars in Portugal. And it was lovely to be able to use some colour for a change. So I made a whole series of those. This isn't one of them, that's a bit later. But that's a pretty funky thing too. And then I started getting interested in these smaller sculptures. And the question, I had been interested for a long time, but the small works that I tried to make tended to feel like maquettes or models. And by giving this a verticality and in doing that, relating it to the figure, it worked. It was successful. It's about 9 inches tall, this one, maybe 8 inches tall. And again, that's a piece of steel from the London docks, that middle piece, that's been forged. And that led later to a series where I was at the bench, but I couldn't move because I'd broken my foot. So I just used what I could reach, and it got smaller and smaller, and I got below the 6-inch barrier, which would seem to me to be a miracle. And that's about 3 inches tall. And I believe it's a real sculpture. It's a real thing. And the wells establish its scale, which was something I was thinking a lot about at that time too. That is that's almost like the finger, the liquid steel going in and establishing a size, because if you blew it up, your weld would be the size of a saucer or something like that, or an apple, which would be ridiculous. So the weld was really speaking of the scale. And there was a little series, I celebrated this, I was so excited by those things, and I made a whole lot. Victoria had a show of them. This one you can really see the welds and the pieces of material kind of amalgamated, becoming one. I like to think they become one. And then something changed, because I was really beginning to allow the through various influences, not least by being here at the studio school, the figure started creeping in. Not this one, but that one. This one was more to do with mollusks, which I've always really liked. And you can pass a piece of paper under that tip, it's not quite touching, so the whole thing's just balanced on those 2 points there, which always excited me. I'm Libran, so the sense of balance seems to be inherent in things I do. And this one's, it's a strange little thing, but it's emerging, and where one form emerges out of another, I didn't weld it, I didn't lock it in place. So that little passage where you can see the material touching but not welded allows this sense of things emerging or going in. And I was very excited with this series as well. But the kind of figure was creeping in a funny way. I've been looking at and collecting a lot of African art by them, as we'll illustrate somewhere down the road here. This is about 6 feet, 6.5 feet tall, this one. 2 views. And things were a little out of sequence here. This is a lava head from Easter Island, and that's supposed to be next to some drawings, but there's a story. That's a little baby African piece. Another one. These are about 4 inches tall. That's your Reuben. And then things are jumping about a bit. You'll have to. We had some problems with putting all the slides together. They all completely went out of sequence. So that's why I was a little bit late getting here. Anyway, things changed, and a daughter came into our lives. And the reason I put this in, when I was at Chautauqua last summer, a woman gave a lecture. She'd had a child recently, and people were asking, how has having a child changed your work process? And they wanted to know how that would be for a man as well. That discussion went on, and it interested me because I had noticed that there's something with Leela. Oh, anyway, I'm jumping. Here we go. I was encouraged by certain artist friends to give up working in steel and make more conceptual art. And I was over in England at Coldhouse Fort on the Thames and saw this gun placement without a function, just standing there as a memorial to the war. This cement thing, and it struck me, it was a sculpture, completely a sculpture. And I loved it. And I got this whole idea that I'd remake this in a gallery somewhere in cement and then go around Europe or Britain, certainly, picking up others and making them. That was going to be me being a conceptual artist. But I was a little down in the mouth about it, and as this fang reliquary attests to. And I had big guns looking over my shoulders. I couldn't resist it, forgive me. And I decided to stick with what I was really in love with anyway. And it didn't really matter if fame and stuff, that was, and making money, just nothing at all there. But anyway, this little series continues. Every now and again I'd work like this, but then I'd have a little excursion back into the open works, because these are much more labour intensive, and there's a real joy in throwing together one of those open sculptures. They come quite fast, and they get together quite fast. Making them, finishing them off takes time, but it's a real pleasure at the end of the day to walk away from the bench with something that you're excited about, and that doesn't happen so much with these. These take time. It's another Easter Island stone figure. This is Cameroon Lehman. It's some vessel of kind. But what really excites me in this is how on earth did they distort that figure to that? It's amazing. It blows me away. It's an early piece. There's pieces like this in a German thing from the late 1900s. So it's actually a very good piece, this one. And this one also is a good piece. This came from the granddaughter of a famous dealer whose father was a painter. This is also another beautiful African thing. It's a shoulder mask, Momoya. And that's a Baole bronze, I think. Anyway, drawing. At a certain point, I had a hand operation and I had to stop making sculpture for 3 years, it turned out, or thereabouts. I could still use my hand, but I couldn't hammer, I couldn't lift weights, I couldn't push grinders and drills. So the drawings, I went up and decided, okay, I'm going to draw. I went up to my mezzanine, where it's a drawing studio where I show the smaller works. And again, the influence of being here at the school came in, because shortly before this happened, a few years before, I started teaching a head modelling class in the evening. And so I'm standing in front of the paper, and the night before I've been teaching, and the model, an Irish girl, had a shaved head, and the shape of her head was absolutely beautiful. And it was in my mind, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I'm standing in front of the paper, and all I can see, I didn't want to make a head. I thought it was going to be more of those linear drawings. But all I could see in my mind's eye was the shape of this head. So I decided the only way to get it out was to put it on the paper, literally take it out of me that way. And I did, and I started messing around with marks inside, and this thing occurred. And that led to, again, a great deal of excitement and experimentation and trying to find ways of drawing. These have jumped a little bit. This is a train window in London at night with, I guess it's salt from de-icing or something, but it struck me as really beautiful, so I took a picture of it. Sorry, that should have been the drawing that related to it. This is actually my studio after Sandy, and there was a beautiful lead-in to that, but that's all out of sequence. And the joke was, needless to say, I got the blues, and my screens turned solid, and we're completely out of whack here at the moment. But this is a Madagascar funerary post. It's a really beautiful piece as well. And Henri that we saw in Paris a few years ago. It all makes sense. There's a head. I wanted them to feel really industrial. Sorry? Was there a question?
How big was that? How big is it?
That's that whole thing. The head's pretty much life size, so that's probably about just under 2 feet tall. And I wanted to really get kind of the modelled area, as I call it, with the welding, liquid seal, supported by this more industrial element. And they reminded me of basketball trophies. You know these things you see all over America? And I thought so it ended up being trophy head, and I like that play on words, because there were also trophy heads in New Guinea and where have you, which have a very different connotation. So I kind of enjoyed that. And that was one of a series of 4. I've only got one image, but I've been looking at a lot of heads. This one's in Scotland. This one, I don't know where I saw that. Maybe it was Paris. But drawing heads suddenly opened up. This is a little series I did. When I was at Chautauqua, I did these. They're just an odd little offshoot. And why these heads are everywhere all of a sudden. And these were a series of 3 sculptures called the Orators. And these are the heads of them. And these are the sculptures up at the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And this central one is called Wisdom. That was the first one. The second one was Dignity. And the third one, which is almost 10 feet tall, was Aspiration. That was the youngest looking one. So that he's aspiring. She is a very dignified lady. That was in my mind. And actually I was a bit shocked with these because I thought I'd gotten too close to African sculpture. But I'm okay with that now. And this was also there, this tube boy. And a beautiful libation cup. And that should be followed by Picasso. It is good. Because all of a sudden, after I got the use of my hands back, I went back to start welding, and I began welding on those pieces, the Orators. But it was just a lot of welding. And it was my first day welding for a few years. And it was boring. I didn't want to be welding, I wanted to be making sculpture. And these are kind of, this is the dirt before the broom actually. But these guys were very instrumental because I made these Beta series, and I realised, hooked into Picasso somehow, in my mind, just a fanciful thing. But that kind of liberated them as well, and I could throw these together really quickly. And at the end of the first day, I had 3 of them on the bench. The painting came later when I was doing the finishing, and they began to look quite, the finish was the finish I'd used on my earlier open pieces. And I wanted to separate them a bit more, and the painting, because I thought of Picasso's Betas, I thought, well, let's put these little stripy costumes in there. And if you put it in one place, it just holds the eye in one place and stops your eye exploring the drawing of the sculpture. So I started spreading it about, and then colour. It started off black and white, and then colour came in. And it was a real exciting experience, and that led to a whole series. This was an earlier one. This one is only about 6 inches wide. It's hilarious. And, so the and these are the new wave bathers. These are the ones that followed the first series. Now, I still get a real kick out of doing them. Aha! So this is from Kentaro. But I've been getting increasingly interested in these woodblock prints, particularly the ladies, and I was making the sculptures, and that's hooks in a little bit to Leela, my daughter, because over the years I noticed she moved in a different way. Not all Chinese girls do this, but Leela has a particular kind of elegance, and the way she moves and the way she sits was really fascinating me. It wasn't Western at all. It was somehow generically. And I wanted to make a little dedication to her somehow, and it became this, which was a completely different sculpture, until I put the little sculpture, which became the head, on top. It wasn't meant to be a head, it wasn't meant to be a nose, but I put it up there, and I put that bowl on top as a top knot, which I couldn't resist. And that's the other view of it, so you can feel the difference as you go round. And if you see the sculpture without that headpiece, that's what it was before I put it on. So it wasn't really a figure until I did that. But it led to a whole sequence. We're a little bit out of whack again. So I cast a bronze from the second one. The first one was East 1. This is East 2. And that's actually the one I'm still working on, which is now in that state. And that's East 3. That's about 3 feet tall, that one. And it's called, as you can see, East 3 Drum Dress. I think that's the title. And these are the things I've been looking at, and I'm fascinated. I somehow correlate the fluidity of hot steel to clay. And there were quite a lot of sculptures that reflect the fluidity of clay. This is an African one, previous Chinese, and things like this, that's clay. The arms are just clay, and they're beautiful, and I think that's going to lead to something. I don't know yet, but I'm looking at things like this, and I'm very enamoured of them, and this in particular. And there's Dad and Leela, all grown up at Storm King with the same tile. And I don't know what's next. Maybe that's the end. Yeah, it seems to want to be the end. So there we are.